welcome back to the Reagan Faulkner Show. Today, we're going to dive into the Seditious Six and try to understand a little bit about why the video that they put out to the American people was so important and so crucial and so terrifying, to be honest. So, on November 18th, 2 senators and 6 representatives released a video where they called for U.S. military personnel to defy what they dubbed illegal orders. And of these individuals, it was Senator Mark Kelly, Senator Alyssa Slotkin, Representative Jason Crow, Representative Chris DeLuzio, Representative Maggie Goodlander, and Representative Chrissy Houlihan. So of these 6, we're really going to be looking at Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin. They're the ones that have popped up in the media the most. They're the ones that really there's the most to talk about. The other ones were definitely involved and are involved in everything that we're going to talk about, but Kelly and Slotkin are the 2 that we're really going to dive into. So if you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to go actually watch the video to understand what we're diving into. But for a little bit of context, the elected officials, it was, I think, 3 on top, 3 on bottom. They were lined up kind of like a Zoom call, I guess would really be the best way to explain it. But they were in this video and they were speaking specifically, they were speaking to U.S. citizens, but specifically they were speaking to members of the U.S. military. And they were stating that they have a constitutional duty, a constitutional oath to defy illegal orders, illegal military orders. And they provided no context about what these orders were, what they were referring to, what deems an order illegal. No context. They just said that as a military personnel, you have the duty to defy illegal orders. And they also invoked images from the Nuremberg trials, which I thought was really wild. That's a really crazy move, given that we don't see anything that even resembles the Nuremberg trials or anything like that. We see they also came out and invoked images from the movie A Few Good Men. So they're bringing up these fantasy, abstract things that the U.S. population, you kind of think of when... I don't even know really what they were trying to do, to be honest. They just brought up things that were very Hollywood, very just picturesque, what you can imagine, instead of bringing up real, actual, objective evidence to back up their statements. They're just kind of off in fantasy land, invoking random images that people think of when they think of military tribunals and things like that. No objective evidence, nothing like that, no facts, and it really is just absolutely crazy to see elected officials go off and do things like this and go against the sitting administration. I mean, it really is completely unprecedented. But the reason why this has gotten so much attention is because Senator Kelly served in the Navy, and he has to abide by, I can't remember the specific name of it, but I think it's the Uniformed Military Conduct, something like that. I think the abbreviation is the UCMC, but basically those are the rules that uniformed members of the military have to abide by. And for what Trump has dubbed sedition, Senator Kelly can actually be sent back into active service. So it's a really big deal for him, which is why he's been so involved and is being investigated now. And then Senator Slotkin, who we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about today, was actually an analyst for the CIA. Now, Kelly has turned this entire thing, he's gone from sedition and defying illegal orders to full campaign donor mode, which is insane. But he is on X, he's making videos, he's requesting money for quote-unquote what's ahead for the future. I think he said something like, we need money for wherever this thing might go, I think was along the lines of one of his quotes. But it's really interesting. He went from trying to save America, trying to save democracy, trying to do whatever it is he thinks he was doing, to straight into the Mom Donnie, like, give me money type vibe. I was baffled when I saw that. But he's really seen a huge surge in donations. So, I mean, it's working. He is raising money. I guess he's trying to raise money in case he has to do get involved in a legal battle due to the FBI probe and some of the consequences that have come from this. But he's seen a huge surge in donations, and he's not even set to be on the ballot until 2028, which is wild. I mean, if you're not raising money for your campaign and you're not raising money for court, if it doesn't go to court, then where is all this money going? What is he gonna do with it? And or he's just gonna let it sit there for 3 years, which I guess is an option. But it's really interesting to see all these donations coming in and that he already has a donor platform set up when he's not even running for office for another 3 years. This is way ahead of the ballgame for most candidates. But as much as it is a political stunt and it's a campaign stunt for these 6 individuals who I believe all plan to run again, I could be wrong, I do believe that all 6 have plans to continue being involved in U.S. politics and continuing to run for election, it goes a lot deeper than just a campaign political stunt. It has huge ramifications. So, jumping into Senator Slotkin, I said that she was an analyst for the CIA. So one of her roles was specifically to review the outcomes of CIA operations in foreign nations and then determine whether or not these operations were successful. So she would review briefs, she would review data, she would go through all this information from operations that the CIA was doing overseas, and then she would use various data points to analyze whether or not the operation was objectively successful or whether it was an objective failure, so that the CIA can know which, I guess, techniques, for lack of better words, are more successful than other ones for specific goals and outcomes. So a lot of these operations would include coordinating propaganda campaigns specifically aimed at regime change, and then changing public opinion against a foreign nation's own government, their own sitting government, and then instilling unrest, confusion, chaos, things like that within a foreign nation's civilian population. So the CIA they'll have a goal of regime change. They'll send operatives into the foreign country. They'll run these propaganda campaigns. They'll do specific use psychological techniques, psychological actions, I guess, within these propaganda things. Again, I'm not super familiar with how the CIA works. I don't think any of us really are, because they're so secretive, but they will go and do these actions to elicit a regime change in a foreign country, and then people like Senator Slotkin will review what was done and whether or not it was an objective success, what techniques were successful, what should be reused, etc., etc. So Slotkin served 3 tours in Iraq, and historically, if you know anything about Iraq and why we were there, one of the dominating motives was to topple Saddam Hussein's regime and then instill democracy in the area. So when she was serving these 3 tours in Iraq, she was extremely familiar with the CIA propaganda machine, regime change, instilling the unrest, causing just genuine disdain for the sitting regime, which obviously Saddam Hussein was a terrible person, so that was probably pretty easy to do, and I don't have any problem with that. I mean, Saddam Hussein was absolutely a terrible person. But she was very familiar with it, is the point I'm trying to make here. She's familiar with the rhetoric, she's familiar with the psychological techniques that they were using, with the psychological campaigns, and then just generally with different types of propaganda and what propaganda serves to be beneficial versus what propaganda doesn't work, or, has more of a varying point of whether or not it'll work. She knows what objectively works, doesn't work, may or may not have a chance. She's very familiar with all of this, and then how to put it into action successfully. So when going after a social media campaign like what these 6 senators did, Slotkin was especially familiar with the process and with the consequences that messaging like that can have, because she's been analyzing it for decades. So given the delivery, given the language of the video, given all of that, President Trump has accused all 6 elected officials with sedition, and then an FBI probe has been launched into the representatives and the senators, into the video, into the motive, into all of it. So now the politicians are coming out, they're defending the video, they're defending what they did, they're calling this political persecution, but it's not. It's an issue of national security. When we see elected officials coming out and trying to tell the military to go against a sitting U.S. president, that's really concerning. That's concerning for national security. That's concerning for military personnel. That's concerning for understanding what orders to take versus what orders not to take, especially when there was no specificity, no objective fact that was given by these senators. And we also need to point out the fact that sedition and treason are very, very different. So when you look at treason, treason is an act that directly goes against the sitting government, the sitting administration. So a lot of times it'll involve a foreign entity or a foreign group. Think like if somebody partnered with China to try to take out the U.S. government specifically, like doing something specifically against the U.S. government, especially with a foreign group, that is treason. Now, sedition is inciting violence or rebellion against a nation's government. So that is what these senators are doing. That's the difference between the treason versus the sedition, is they're trying to stir up rebellion. They're trying to make, or maybe not make, but incentivize, I guess you could say, the military personnel to rebel against orders, to go against orders, to go against President Trump. And that is why it's sedition, because it's trying to incite violence or rebellion instead of physically doing the act of the rebellion or the act of the violence. So that is a state crime. Sedition is a state crime, while treason is a federal crime, from my understanding of it. So that's just a little bit of background into why they got accused of sedition and not treason. But going in a little bit more, there are a lot. So this is something that's been coming up very, very often in the media after this, and just kind of looking at some of the techniques that the left has been using with recent protests and demonstrations. But we see a lot of similarities with leftist rhetoric, with the No Kings protests and the BLM protests, and the type of propaganda that they're pushing forward, and then this thing called a color revolution. So historically, color revolutions have been used to overthrow governments and utilize regime change, or instill regime change. So basically what they'll do is these revolutions will be dubbed a color. I believe there was a pearl revolution and a tulip revolution. So you'll use a color or an object to kind of vaguely describe this revolution, and the goal of the revolution will be regime change, overthrowing a sitting administration, etc., etc. They're characterized specifically by what I've said before: propaganda, changing public opinion, instilling a distrust in the government, things like that. And when we think about that, and then we think about what the left has been doing since President Trump's second term has begun, they're really similar. I'm not saying that this is what they're trying to do, but I think it's extremely odd, the similarities that are coming out. First of all, calling Trump a king, calling him Hitler, calling him a dictator and an authoritarian. Those are the first things that you would do if you want to elicit distrust within a population. You want to make them think that the president wasn't elected legally or accurately, so calling him a king because monarchs aren't elected. Hitler, who was elected, but was just a really terrible person. Authoritarians, normally have an election process and then they just refuse to leave or refuse to hold another election. They're using these terms that are eliciting distrust from the American public towards our elected officials. They're also calling conservatives Nazis and fascists, which is putting the same motive or feeling about Trump that people may have towards Trump upon just regular everyday conservatives or other elected officials that are conservative but not necessarily Trump. So that's furthering that distrust. The No Kings protests are just really ingraining that idea that Trump is this monarch, that they're not even saying he wasn't elected accurately. I really don't understand how they can do the No Kings protest. I really don't. But for more on that, you can go back to the No Kings episode from a month or so ago. And then bringing up Trump's phony felonies that actually were political persecution, they're bringing that up to elicit distrust, elicit confusion, elicit chaos, make the American people just doubt Trump. I mean, they really are trying to change public opinion. We're seeing people that have been strong MAGA supporters changing their opinion. We're seeing this clashing of conservative opinions within the party. It's really concerning, and it is just propaganda. It really, really is. And then utilizing the Epstein files as a political issue, I guess. I mean, if they had anything on Trump, the Biden administration would have dropped that back when he was president from 2020 to 2024. These files didn't just magically appear when Trump took office on January 20th of this year. If they had something on Trump, it would have been dropped. It would have been in the news with his court case last July, or June, I believe it was. So they're using all of these different situations, all of this rhetoric, all of this propaganda to try to elicit distrust within Americans and then make them change their political opinions or change their opinions on government or politics or whatever it may be. Very, very similar to what we do in foreign countries when we try to elicit a regime change. Even more interesting that Slotkin was in the CIA and is extremely familiar with these moves and these types of propaganda. Now, elected officials with military and security backgrounds calling for just this vague, defy illegal orders, whatever, without any reference to what the orders are or why they're illegal is just extremely concerning. It's not right, and it has a lot of opportunity to backfire from a national security perspective. And then after all of this, after all this illegal orders, defy it, blah, 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 after all of it, Slotkin came out and said that none of these orders even were illegal. She said that nothing illegal has even been done, which is insane. They did all of this, stirred up all of this drama, all of this turmoil, literally made an FBI probe have to be launched for something that's not even reality. And most Americans, you wouldn't know that. An everyday American doesn't know the difference between a legal and an illegal order from the military. I mean, it's just absolutely wild to make Americans afraid for something that's not even accurate. And Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, he made a post on X or Twitter, whatever we call it nowadays, about how messages like this are specifically dangerous for the military. And yes, they can be dangerous for everyday civilians, like I said, because of the propaganda and the psychological impact, but specifically for the military, because the military has very, very specific ways that they deal with illegal protocols or illegal orders and protocols for how to report these illegal orders and how to deal with them and how to handle them. So when people who aren't actively serving start trying to stir up this mess and stir up this drama with these vague terms, it creates a lot of chaos and distrust and confusion within the military. And basically what Hegseth said is that political actors have no business stirring up this chaos and confusion within the military, and that the vague language just makes it an unhealthy place within the military because people don't know what's happening. They don't know what they need to be looking out for, and it just breeds this distrust that keeps coming up. I feel like I've said that word so much, but that's really what it's doing. It's distrust, and then it's confusion, and it's doubt, and it's chaos, and it just is really, really bad for the everyday rank and file service members in the United States military. And then when we start looking at consequences, maybe it's related, maybe it's not, we don't know yet. But 8 days after this video was posted, we saw an Afghan national that served with the U.S. military in Afghanistan during the evacuation. He attacked 2 National Guardsmen, actually 3. One tragically passed away, one was extremely injured, and the third one was the one that took the individual out, took the shooter out. But when we see elected officials, people who we should trust as Americans or as immigrants or as anybody living in the United States, when we see them saying that the military is being given illegal orders, that they're doing illegal things, it's going to cause consequences. And maybe this attack was a consequence. Maybe it was an Afghan terrorist, a Muslim radical, whatever we want to call it, whatever it may be. But we can't be surprised to see these attacks on our military after rhetoric like this is being spread by people that we are supposed to trust as Americans and people who are supposed to reflect and uplift American ideals and American values and American tradition. It's rhetoric like this from the elected officials, from Democratic leadership, and even from radicalized professors and teachers in colleges, high schools, middle schools, that are leading to the increase in political violence in the U.S. They're leading to the violence at protests that turn into riots. They're leading the violence where people are trying to attack ICE agents. They're leading to the violence of people like Charlie Kirk being shot for expressing their opinions. And it really is their rhetoric. There's come out after these tragic events and they say, oh my gosh, there's no room for political violence in the United States, but then they're eliciting it. It's quite the contradiction and really, really just disheartening. But I can't even tell you how many posts I've seen after the National Guardsman attack where people are saying that they shouldn't have been there in the first place. They wouldn't have been shot if they weren't there because we shouldn't have the military on the streets of America. I'm sorry. I can't even grasp that concept. They were following legal orders. Mind you, these orders were not illegal. They were minding legal orders. They were serving their country. They were protecting and defending the homeland. To say that they should have just not been there in the first place is an absolute just slap in the face to our service members that serve day in and day out to protect our rights. It's disgraceful, it's wrong, and it's just nauseating. And these are normal Americans. These are normal Americans that have been radicalized by the rhetoric that we're talking about. And it's just sickening, to be quite honest with you. The left has been pushing this propaganda machine for years. It started with universities. It started with radical professors indoctrinating young adults in universities. It progressed through the BLM movement that we saw start, I think it started around 2016, moved through 2020 with the George Floyd riots. And now we're actually seeing targeted propaganda being used against citizens of the United States. It is sickening and it is wrong and it is thoroughly un-American. And these 6 representatives and or elected officials, they should be completely ashamed of themselves for what they're doing and how they're behaving against their own constituents. The rhetoric against Charlie Kirk, specifically demonizing him and his fans, it's also just sowing this distrust against everyday Americans. It is sickening, it is wrong, and it is inappropriate to be using these violent rhetoric, this psychological warfare against innocent everyday Americans. We're seeing billboards popping up from Win Without War, which is a coalition of progressive activists and progressive organizations incentivizing military personnel to defy orders. And there's like an encrypted not website, an encrypted email chain where you can email the group and tell them what's going on. They'll give you suggestions on how to fight it. It is truly sedition. It is truly going against a sitting administration and going against what is the best for America and our national security. We have a lot of foreign threats right now. We have a lot of illegal immigration issues. We have a lot of people who are not happy with the United States, and to be trying to sow this distrust within America and to create an issue in the interior when we have so many threats abroad is sickening and worrisome and extremely concerning. But it's up to us to see through this deception. It's up to everyday Americans like you and I to see through the deception, to see through the propaganda, to see this psychological attack and these psychological tools being used upon Americans, and for us to recognize that we are in fact being used as political pawns, no different than how foreign citizens are used by our Central Intelligence Agency, and to not fall for it. To be quite frank, our government has been invaded by radical Marxists the same way that we go into foreign countries and invade them. They're using psychological warfare on us the same way that our government uses psychological warfare on other countries. And they want a regime change. They want to stop Donald Trump. They want to prevent him from saving America, prevent him from putting America first. They want to destroy America. And it is up to us to say, no, we're not having it. No, we are not putting up with these games. We are America first. We're going to save America. And no matter how much you throw at us, we are going to stand by our country and our government. It's up to us to say no. Thank y'all so much for joining me on today's episode of the Reagan Faulkner Show. If you want more, check us out on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X. That's going to be at the Reagan Faulkner Show and at the Wilmington Standard. Look at our website, thewilmingtonstandard.com and reaganfaulkner.com. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next one.